Let's see how he looks at you now. A few background information before I get into the story. I am a bastard child born out of wedlock, but I am not the only one. I have a fraternal twin brother, we'll call him Dill. When my mother and father, who were both 25 at the time, found out they were having twins, my father left my mother in the hospital the day after we were born. Growing up, he was never in our lives, and my mother didn't have any ill intent towards him. We resented the mention of a father who we never seen or met in our lives, and was generally happy with my single mother. Even there was days my mother would share old Polaroids of them together, saying things like how we look like our father, and how those we great days, but how nothing could compare to the day we were born. Fast forward to 18 years old, Dill and I were at our graduation from high school. My entire mom's side of the family was there to celebrate, take pictures, and then have an after party at my aunt's home. Before that could happen, my mother said she had a surprise for us, as between the crowd, a man was emerging. Dill and I soon felt a terrible distaste, as we could tell this man was the man who seemed to walk out on my mother all those years ago. We felt hatred towards this man, even if my mother smiled whenever she would talk about him. Our father cried, in turn making my mother cry, as they soon told us how he was involved in our lives, even if it wasn't in person or physical. My parents told us that when we were born, they agreed that they couldn't take care of twins with the income they had. With a worded agreement, my parents agreed that my father would have to walk out for most of our lives to support us, and sent money off from a job miles away from our birth town. So the years of birthdays, cars, Christmas presents, Halloween costumes, and Thanksgiving dinner wasn't only paid by my mother, but our father as well. They handed us envelopes that they said was for our college tuition. Our father even took us by the hands and got on his knees while crying. As if on an instant, it was like our resentment towards this man fluttered away. I cried, and Dill was helping him up. Without a second thought, we embraced our parents, and my father wouldn't stop apologizing. Our relationship with our father 9 years later couldn't be stronger. We bond any way children and their father could have. With their help, we graduated from college, me in business and fashion, while my brother in computer sciences. We are both 27 now, doing things we both love. Now, you are probably wondering, maybe they got pro-revenge on their father who abandoned them for 18 years. I'm here to tell you, no, it isn't. My pro-revenge story is about the woman our father brought to our high school graduation. Our stepmother, her name being Heather for this story, as for privacy reason. Heather was and still is married to our father. At first glance, she was a very nice-looking woman, and we were happy that our father was in love with someone. Our mother had no qualms about the marriage, as she was partially the instigator for my father's proposal. Heather was about 5 years younger than my father, who is 53 years old now, and has 3 other boys, 6, 8, and 19 then, 15, 16, and 28 now, with another husband. We also get very well along with them, my brother and I loving the fact we have friendly, kind, and sweet stepbrothers who would step in if anything was wrong. But what we first thought was not at all what we seemed. The story. Within the first 6 years we got to know our father and Heather. We noticed that Heather was extremely babied and spoiled by our father. She and our stepbrothers wore clothing brands and had expensive devices. My father told us that he would shower us the same way if we pleased. But we passed on the offer as just reconnecting our father, and the times he spoiled our behinds off when we were children while we resented him was enough to spoil us rotten. The days we would spend at our father's house, I would wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom or drink water to hear Heather shouting at my father, who would attempt to quickly calm her down in a non-threatening fashion. I didn't understand why he was being yelled at, but it slowly pricked at me whenever I experienced it. It wasn't until I realized my father would often visit us with scratch marks, cuts, and bruises on his face, and sometimes his arms. That was always unsettling to my brother and I when our father would joke that a cat would dig in their trash, or some random excuse that was an obvious lie. We figured we couldn't do anything until our father would stop bottling up his truth. Our stepbrother, the eldest, who we will call Matt, came with us to go drinking and dancing on our 25th birthday. My brothers got wasted. I had a bad experience with an ex-boyfriend and drinking, so I stayed away from drinking. Therefore, I was the designated driver for that day. With the help of a few, less drunk, friends, I managed to get my brothers in the car. Matt in the front and Dill in back, his face pressing against the leather cushion while bumbling something silly. As we drove home, Matt was slowly getting sober, but I could tell he couldn't fully comprehend what he was saying. He smiled at me with his silly drunk face and slurred some stuff about how lucky we were to have such a caring father and how much his younger brothers loved us. That made me happy until he would blurt out something that made me uneasy. What came out of his mouth would make me seethe with rage. "Our mom always talks bad about him and your mother to us. Mom hits him too," he said with a laugh before he leaned against the door, said he was tired, and went to sleep. How dare she? I would think as I got to my mother's house and got my brothers up enough to help them stumble into the house. I would tell my brother and my mother what Matt had said when he was drunk. My Dill was pissed when he found out, and my mother was just in shock as she thought she was good friends with Heather. Dill confronted Matt 2 weeks later about what Heather would do to our father and why. Matt said that he knew Heather was extremely manipulative and spoiled, so much so that Matt's father was angry with Heather and divorced her after she had cheated with his slightly more wealthy friend. He told us Heather would scratch, throw stuff, threaten and belittle my father whenever she didn't get what her or any of her children wanted immediately. My father, being the kind man he is, would tolerate it and give her anything she pleased with a smile. Matt would be forced to stop her before anything worse could happen. There would be days where she took her kids and stayed at her parents' house if my father would attempt to refuse or tell her that funds were low. It was terrible when she had found out our father was tucking aside money for our college funds. She would talk terribly, in text and in person to her children, about my father being a filthy, broke Cambodian immigrant and not loving her, my mother being a gold-digging woman, white bitch, trying to coax my father into help pay for our lives on the side. We were disgusted and pissed at Heather. She would hurt our father and talk horribly of my parents without looking at her entitled self. This was a moment where we would need to put her where she belonged. We wanted to ruin her, but we settled on changing the way our father would look at her, which would be damaging her in a special way. Dill, Matt, and I came up with a plan. Dill and I were our father's pride and joy after all, so why not put one of ourselves as bait? With the three of us, we scrounged up money we saved up together from jobs, birthday money, gigs, and side tutoring from the several years we grew up together. Dill and I were saving money to buy my mother and her boyfriend a new place to live, as their place was being littered with pests ranging from rats to termites each summer. So the money we pulled together came up to around $2,800. After an argument with Dill, it was decided that I would be the one to enact the revenge. After the 3 months of gathering and careful planning, I had taken the money and told my father and Heather that we wanted to buy mother and her boyfriend a home to live in. My father asked my budget, and I pull out the money, making an effort to count it in front of them to push the bait. When Heather saw the money, I could see her eyes widen in surprise. My father told me that we were good kids, that he was proud of us, that we grew up to be kind people. I felt kind of guilty. I was going to contort my father's feelings towards this woman. I was hesitant, but looked at Heather's face. I was determined. We spent the next hour finding a good home for mother, settling on one as we would visit the real estate place the next morning. I took the money and went to my room. I hid the cash under my bed mattress, the most obvious place a person would hide it, right? During the whole house finding, my brothers were setting up something in my room, something that wasn't in my room before. One of those large Valentine's teddy bears that Dill had got me when my ex-boyfriend dumped me on Valentine's Day. Matt, Dill, and I would leave the house, going to our mother's house under the guise of saying we were going to tell her the surprise. Fast forward to 5 hours later, we go back to my father's house. He was at work, doing the night shift as a security guard. When we walked into my room, I was visibly surprised, as all my drawers of my dressers were pulled out. My closet was ravaged through, and my bed mattress was flipped. We didn't expect a hurricane to go through my room needlessly. The teddy bear was also disturbed though, thrown on the ground with its face to the ground. We were slightly panicked as Dill had picked up the teddy and ripped out threads of its back and pulled out something. I went call to my father, a little panicked, and said my room was rummaged through and the money was gone. Honestly, I was actually scared because it was most of the money Dill and I saved to actually get my mother a place, thinking it would have been spent soon enough. My father was panicked saying he'd be home as fast as he can. As soon as my father got home, I was joined in my room with Matt, Dill, and our father. Dill and I expressed our disappointment and anger to my father about Heather. Next to my laptop was camera that Matt had received from his dad. It was plugged into the computer as Dill asked my father to sit down and watch the video. The video played. It had showed an empty room before Heather had walked in, not at all sneakily as she pulled out my drawers, pulled my clothes out, and threw it to the ground, before repeating it with my closet. She even walked over straight to the bear and picked it off before frustratingly throwing it to the ground. It was facing most of the ground for the time, as there was no sound either. As the video ended, Dill and I could see the gears clicking in our father's head. Our father was kind, not dense after all. In our 9 years of knowing this man, we have never seen him angry until that night alone. Dad had called Heather, telling her to come home immediately. She got home 4 hours later with 3 bags of brand-name clothing. I felt my heart break, as I already knew she had probably spent all of that money. I started to choke back my sobs as Dill would try to calm me down, being angry himself. Matt just staring at his mother with a face of disappointment. My father began to ruthlessly shout at Heather. He reprimanded her for spending all the hard-earned money of their children. She scoffed, handing over the envelope with only 3/4 of the original money and some change. This only made father more angry as he would shout at her to get out of his house, threatening to divorce her and throw her onto the streets without the items. Her eyes got wide and her face contorted into a face of, "Oh no." She began to plead and beg as my father forcefully turned her around and pushed her out of the house, still yelling at how horrible she was. Matt was forced to follow because even if she was a horrible person, she was still his mother. For only 10 minutes, Heather banged and begged to be let back in before she was forced to leave my father's property. My father apologized profusely that night, as I did nothing but stare at the leftover money and cry in my room. My father is still married to that woman, but he refused to look at her, most of the time, or sleep in the same bed. He still loves her in a way as a husband would a wife, but now it is different for him, as his wife was the filthy thief of his blood and flesh. We had given Matt his portion of the bait money and was given back a little of the money when Heather returned a few of the items back to the stores. Fortunately, 2 years later, we finally bought my mother a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in a non-infested neighborhood. She was unbelievably grateful. Maybe now it's time to help save up divorce money.